Okay, welcome to Faith and Calm, class 239. I think my eyes have finally they got the right thing for the cataract, so I'm going to try and lock it in later this week. So very good. Um, 5 tries. What we're going to talk about. So I wanted to talk about the living with the partial, but I'm going to segue and blend into what my wife is going to talk about, which is the
topic is that the
what's the
time
topic?
we're in this past week is one of the most heart wrenching weeks for Jews that I've been through.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. And so I was going to say my topic was if it doesn't break you, then you grow from it. You can make it right. So there's a statement that came out from the Alter Rebbe once. It was back in the 1700s, and he came out to the Olam, to the community, and he made an announcement that we have to live with the times. So everybody's trying to wonder what that meant. Does it mean we live with the New York Times? Does it mean what does it mean to live with the times? I mean, you're Jews, right? We live with the times.
Making noise. Okay.
Okay, so am I. I'm making noise. So they got his brother to explain. No, it means that you have to live with the parsha of the week. So the center of the week that we read on Shabbos, that's what you're supposed to live with. And that's what the Alter Rebbe meant by living with the times. Now, the Rebbe once asked a question about this, and he said, "Well, if that's what he meant, then he shouldn't have left everybody so confused. He said you should have to live with the parsha." So the Rebbe answered the question by saying, "For the Alter Rebbe, that's exactly what he means. It means if you're tuned with the reality, the pulse of what's going on today, then it's related directly to what was going through in the parsha." So I think Parsha Shmos has a lot of lessons about life and about and important. And I heard this talk from Rabbi Simon Jacobson. He said it in the Kollel Hodos Maisios, which is a Kollel in Crown Heights, specifically set up for post smicha rabbinical students who are going to go out into the world and need to connect their theoretical learning with the practical questions people are going to ask. And this week's Parsha has very much related to questions people ask, because a lot of questions people ask have to do with.
I'm just resting my foot.
Don't do that. Then a lot of questions that people ask have to do with suffering. Why me? Why this? Why? And it's reality. People want to know why such and such a thing is happening to them. So uh, so if all the parshas, all the stories in the Chumash, the stories in this week's parsha are really very heartbreaking, because the suffering was quite great. I'm looking down at the picture here. My wife's cartoon here for the parsha here. I guess this is the.
It's very hard to show pictures on this thing. You have to go. I don't know. It's just very hard.
Oh, because it's blurry.
I don't know why. It just doesn't.
Oh, okay.
It won't work.
Okay.
Forget it.
Forget it.
Okay. I tried it with
suffering. You told the story last week anyway. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of violence. Jews being beaten, people being enslaved. Moshe finally says, "Why are you being bad to these people?" He's complaining to God. Why are you treating the Jews so badly? And these are questions that people have in the field. And so the Rabbi Jacobson, the Rebbe, points out that that you're not making up nice little ideas yourself. When you speak from the place of Torah, you're speaking with an eternal voice, and those answers sometimes are more on dot than anything you could possibly come from any psychological backgrounds and so forth. So the question is yes, why suffering, and why me, and why this? When was my life actually going to improve? So the line in the Chumash that relates to this is, Kasher Yanu, as they suffered, Kain Yerbu v'Kain Yirtzu. They increased and they multiplied. Because the theme of Judaism is not asking why bad things are happening. Ultimately, ultimately trying to answer that question is going to get you into a lot of trouble, and you're going to try like you're defending God, and you're going to get and people are not going to just shut down, and because pain and suffering is really not an intellectual thing, it's an experiential thing, it's an emotional thing, and so the Rebbe usually didn't emphasize why, and he also, whenever people came to him and asked him why, he wouldn't just say, "Well, God should have rahmanas on you. You'll feel you'll feel better in the morning, whatever." It's true, that God should have mercy on us, and you should feel pain for the other person. But the Rebbe never left it that way. He always used to say that you will see that you will grow from this, as the English phrase goes. Those things that can't break me, they make me into who I am. They make me grow. So at the time when something's terrible happening, you don't try and explain why, but we do know, and we do have a lot of faith and belief that whatever we go through, it's actually going to eventually turn out that we're going to grow from this and we'll be the people we are. And the Jews, from the experience of Egypt, they became superpower. I mean, if you look around, Rabbi Simon Jacobson said once he was asked to speak about this subject at the American Psychological Association, and they have a lot of studies to how to talk to people with suffering and so forth like that. He says if you want to learn how to deal with terrible things happening, Holocaust and other kinds of stuff, then you just have to look at the Jews and how, because the Jews have been going through this for thousands of years, and our enemies are all disappeared, and we're still around. Because the answer of the Jew has always been, don't ask why, it's a useless question. Ask, what am I supposed to do as a response to this? And that is how the Jews came out of the Holocaust, and that's why the Jews survived. Is they said, my response to this has to be, I'll never come up with an answer of why God did this. And as the Rebbe once said in a Farbrengen, it says if God doesn't tell us why he did it explicitly, then the answering the question why is probably not for us to try and answer either. So we don't have to answer why, but we have to understand what our response is. And the response is, and the people in the audience, he said, were really very hit by this, the psychologists, because they said, that is, go study the Jews. We have grown. There were a lot of psychological studies that came out about Jews post-Holocaust, and they said, by all rights, the Jews will be completely disappeared by the year 1970, because the center of Judaism was in Europe. American Jews was going downhill. And if you had made any calculations, you would have said, this is finished. There's no real way for the Jews to recover from this disaster. And the answer is, we didn't take that. We didn't believe in those answers. We lived on a higher plane, and we said, you know what? we're not taking into account things logically and calculated wise. And now I'll make my transition to another story in the Parsha, which is a very interesting story. And you wonder why they tell this story. It's a medrash. It says that when Moshe was put in the basket into the Nile, there was the daughter of Paro, whose name was Batya or Bisya, and she was going down to take a bath in the Nile. She saw the little basket, and she heard there was a boy's voice in there, the voice of a nar, a young lad. It wasn't a little lad, it was a little baby. A lot of discussions about that. Maybe he was hoarse like I was that day. It says, the line says that she stretched out her amasa. Amasa is usually translated as arm. Rashi says it could mean that she sent her maidservants, because the amma is also a maidservant. But if it says arm, it doesn't make any sense, because how do you reach into the Nile with just your arm to grab a baby in the middle of the Nile? So he quotes the Medrash that says that her arm got longer and longer and longer, because it didn't call it an arm. It called it, because there's another word for arm. It called it an amasa, which could have said her hand, yad. Amasa is the amma, which is the length from here to here. That's called an amma. So that's a measurement of distance, like a yard. A cubit it's in English. So it says her arm became cubits and cubits long. And if you look at those coloring books, like what my wife does with the kids, they always show the picture of Basia with her arm getting longer and longer and longer. So this comes from Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson says, what would you do if all of a sudden you stretched out your hand and it started getting 100 meters long or something like that? You probably would scream and go into a panic and say, "Get me out of here!" Somehow she didn't do that. This is a very strange story. And what would be wrong if the story was that she just swam out there and got the baby herself? That would be very interesting, because here you have the daughter of Paro actually saving a Jew and bringing him back home. And let me tell you, that story is a very strange story in itself. If you had, just for exaggeration, if you had Hitler, he had a daughter in 1940, and she had mercy on a little Jewish child, and she found him in the street, and she brought him home to the Berghof and to her father and so forth, and said she's raising that baby. I mean, you'd say that's I can't believe that story is true, because it just sounds so strange. Why would somebody take in a Jewish kid into Nazi headquarters? And that's what she basically did. She took in a Jewish kid. All the Jewish kids were being massacred, and she brought her home. And she was the daughter of her handmaids were saying, "You're crazy. If anybody should follow the laws, it should be the daughter of the king. And you're not, other people maybe not, but you're the daughter of the king. You should definitely." So she didn't act rationally, and she acted irrationally, you could say. But you know what? She saw an injustice. She saw something not right. She had something that she said, "I have to do something." And what the lesson of the story is, and the reason why the rabbis explain it, it's not going to help me.
Okay.
The reason the rabbis explain it, or don't just leave the story as daughter of Paro saved a Jewish kid, which would be a great story in itself. They say the Medrash to emphasize, to drive home the point, to provide the harmony to the plain old music of the story. The harmony, you play it, it adds more color to it. They're basically saying, when you see something that's unreachable, but it's the right thing to do, and you reach out your arm, then God takes your arm and gives you a greater reach than you would have before. Basia basically reached for something that was right, and her reach was increased. And that is the lesson that's coming from this story. And not only did she save that one boy, she saved all the Jewish people. And God said, "You take in my child and you save my boy, then I will call you my daughter." And that's what her name means. Basia, the daughter of God. She became the daughter of God, and she was and she changed the nature of the world, because she saw injustice, and she said, "I have to do something about it." And if that isn't enough of the story, then you have Moshe too. Moshe, later on, he was raised by Basia, and he was raised in that spirit. And he saw one Jewish man being beaten, and he said, "I have to save that man." And he killed the Egyptian taskmaster. Now, logically, rationally, you should have said, "You know what?" He should have said quiet. He was the second in command. He probably would be. He was the grandson of Paro, the adopted grandson. He might have been able to take over Egypt and being able to take over the power of the controlling and free all the Jews. Instead, he acted irrationally, and he was thrown out of the country. And so he wasn't able to save all the Jews at that time. So if anybody called logically and rationally, they would have told him, "You're doing something that's not correct." On the other hand, you know what? He did something right. And because of that, his grasp was thick. So when you do the right thing, when you hold to your principles, and you don't necessarily do things because it's politically correct or people will approve of you and give you a slap on the back and put your name in the papers and all these other kinds of stuff, then what happens? God extends your reach. And that's the lesson of the story. And that, of course, certainly does also connect to the whole idea of not dealing with terrorists and not arguing and not giving them the time of day. Because when the Jews push them down and say, "You know what? There's no need for negotiation. There's nothing to give you. You are wrong. You are completely wrong. You are monsters. And not no one Jewish girl or man or child should be suffering one more minute. And when you say that clearly and you make that clear to your enemy and you make that statement to the rest of the world, then you've made a moral statement. The rest of the stuff is all just political shenanigans and so forth. So we have to, as Jews, be able to say there's truth, there's correctness. And when we speak that way, then God, even if it doesn't necessarily, the advisors to Moshe, the advisors to Batya would have said, you're not acting rationally. You actually do. You make, because God extends your hand, the right things happen. So we as Jews have to have that message. It's very relevant for today. It's really relevant for our times. And so I'll finish off with a little story that that I never heard before, which I think sort of hammers this home. So Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson said, it was when he was still a bacher, not married. So this has got to be our wedding, time.
Yes,
so,
when he was still a bacher.
Yeah. That would be 30 years ago. He was approached by Rabbi Moshe Kotlovsky, in charge of all the Chabad Shluchim, sending Chabad rabbis around the world, and said to him, how would you like to go for Passover to Kobe, Japan? So Rabbi Y.Y. thought, hey, Brooklyn is dull. I'd like to do I'd love to do a Passover in Kobe. So he takes his friend, Rabbi Moshe Lieberman, who lives in Newton, and they went off to Kobe, Japan. He's Chabad of Newton. And that's a whole story. That's a fascinating story. It's a great story. I've told it before. I could tell it again. No. Leave me alone. But anyway, this is the story that after that happened, they had a great time. They had it with 200 people there. It was very exciting. After that, he was asked to come to Tokyo for the Shabbos after Passover. So he went to Passover to teach a class in Pirkei Avos. He gave the class, and after the class, somebody asked him, where are you eating? And he says, well, we've got some doggy bags, me and my friend Moshe. We'll go back to the hotel and we'll eat it there. He says, come to us. We have everything kosher. We'll set you up. He says, Rabbi says, I don't think you know this. We keep Pas Israel. We keep only, a certain level of Chalav Israel, certain levels of, a lot of restrictions. And the guy says, no problem. And he looks religious. Okay, so Rabbi Y.Y. goes back to his house, which is in Japan. And they have very small houses in Japan, like a tiny little 3-room house. And he goes in, and the wife greets him. But the wife is Japanese. She says her name is Yakita. And he goes, whoa, wait, what's this? I mean, this is an intermarried couple? But then out comes from one of the rooms, comes a little boy, Rachmiel, with payas and so forth. And she says, he's learning Mishnayos. We would love if you would test him. And actually, my name is converted. My name is Rachel, I forget now, Rachel Dina or something like that. And he had a wonderful Shabbos there with them. And, and it was really a pleasure to see, they homeschool the kids, they teach them. She became, the whole story was as follows. He wasn't even religious. He was an American. He came to Kobe because he could teach English classes in Japan. And he married a Japanese girl. The Japanese girl, this Yakita, came and she said, I'd like to tell me something about Jews. And he says, I really don't know anything about Judaism or Jews. So she started to read up about it, and she liked it so much that she converted conservative. And then she brought him in, and then she converted. She went to California, and she got a real conversion. And now they have a religious family there in Japan. Okay, time goes by. Rabbi Y.Y. forgot about the whole story. And a couple of years later, he was asked by his father, he says, there's a blank part in the Allgemeiner Journal. I need a story for it. And Rabbi Y.Y. says, I really don't have anything prepared for this week. I suppose, he says, no, you always write something from the Parsha. Write something on the Parsha. So he goes looking at his notes, and the only thing he could find was this particular story. So, but the story is not about necessarily about the Parsha at that time. Parsha, it was the week after Shavuos. But he figures, I think I can change the story. So he writes about this, person who converted. That connects like the Rus, the whole story of Rus and the conversion. And he writes up the story. The next week, He's at home with his father, and there's a guest there from guy, and the guy says, this is terrible nepotism. I read your stories, and I expected to read something about the parsha, and your story was not even about the parsha. This is a tragedy, and if your father wouldn't have printed it unless you were his son. So it was a terrible story. My wife's basically agreeing, basically thinking, this is a terrible story, what he did was bad. Recycling that story, and it really wasn't about the parsha. And then a few weeks later, he gets a call from a rabbi in Agora Hills. And this rabbi says, I have to thank you. He says, why? So the rabbi says, because we have a couple here. They recently came to here from Japan. They were here at my Shabbos table. There was nobody else there. And so they felt comfortable in telling me some of the problems that they've had since they've moved from Japan to the United States. There's a lot of small-mindedness. The kids are made fun of in school. There's some really nasty things and so forth. People can sometimes be very insensitive and very cruel. And the rabbi was feeling, pretty bad because he couldn't justify any of that. And he says, I don't know how to answer you, but I have a custom of reading an article from this rabbi in the Allgemeiner Journal in Yiddish. I read it at my Shabbos table and I translate it each week. Now, normally it comes earlier in the week, and I read it beforehand, but I haven't read it yet because it didn't come on Friday. So it came today. So I'll just read it and maybe you'll find some inspiration in it. And he starts reading the story. The story happens to be that there was, Rabbi YY starts it out with saying, sometimes your Judaism starts getting dry and rote, and you stop appreciating it. And then you meet a couple, somebody who's alive, who's excited, who's happy to be a Jew, who did a lot of sacrifice to become a Jew, and so forth. And it just inspires you. And he went on with the story. And of course, this rabbi from Agora Hills was crying. The lady Yakima was crying. Her husband was crying. The kids were crying. It just goes to show that, when you actually stand up and say the right thing, regardless of what other people say, it doesn't belong, that God somehow extends your arm, you affect other people, you make an impression on somebody else's life, and it causes a chain reaction that you wouldn't necessarily have known, because human reactions are more like, as the Rebbe once pointed out, explained to a Russian rabbi, it's not like chemistry, where you need a certain amount of hydrogen and oxygen to make a certain amount of water. It's more like a nuclear reaction, and that one atom hits another atom, and that causes a chain reaction throughout the world. And that is what we are doing here. We may have a small class, but just tell over your life, tell it over honestly, explain to people, let people see who they are and the greatness that they are. And that has a chain reaction throughout the rest of the world. With that, I'll turn my over to Shalom Shudis, and I'll be glad to do that because it's still recording, right?
I hope so.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yep.
Thank you. Oh, just 1 second. Very nice to see everybody. Thank you. Very nice. Thank you. Thank you for so much coming. First of all, does anybody want to say anything before I begin?
No, it's great to hear. I like the thing that you're already trying and God extends your arm.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I remember one time I had to write a grant for Shiloh House, and I had something like 11 minutes to do 4 more essays or 9 more essays. I don't remember what it was. And it was like impossible, literally impossible. I said, okay, here we go. I'm holding Rabbi's hand in one hand. I'm holding Hashem's hand in the other. Let's just go. And somehow I did it and we got the grant. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Pizza Sedera. It was a fast thing. Anybody else have anything they want to say? It's so nice to see you. Baruch Hashem. See you all.
Nice to see you too, Shlomo Sehudis.
Thank you. So I just want to give a little thing from a previous parsha that I just thought, I just a little snippet that I just heard. Oh, first I want to start with the 4 things I always start with. Number 1, we are living in remarkable times. Nothing like it. And the Rebbe says this is the unfolding of the redemption. And we know from the sages from years ago, they said, I don't want to be alive at the unfolding of the redemption because it's going to be a rocky process. But that's where we are. The Rebbe explained it to us. And the Rebbe was never wrong about anything that any public pronouncement that he made. So we know this is the unfolding of the redemption. And also the Rebbe hinted many times that he is King Mashiach. He is Melech Mashiach. And he said that the grave will have no dominion over Melech Mashiach. And the second thing I usually say is our souls were handpicked to be here at this time because we have, why? Because each one of us has a vital role to play. We're needed. Each one of us is needed right now. And we were given all the tools that we need. We have the Torah, which is our guidebook, and we have the mitzvahs, which are our power tools. And finally, what we're doing tonight by learning about redemption, by learning about Mashiach, we're actively advancing the process. That's what the Rebbe said. There's nothing that speeds up the redemption faster than learning about it. So I just want to say something very sweet that I read it in I read it or heard it. I think I heard it from Rabbi Zalman Tachtel at Chabad of Kansas, University of Kansas, and he was talking about, it was a parsha from a couple of weeks ago when it was Vayigash, when Yosef reveals himself to the brothers. And as soon as he says, Ani Yosef, the brothers are like, oh, they're so embarrassed. And, I have to say that I thought about that simplistically for a long time. They're so embarrassed because of what they did. But Rabbi Tachtel said that's not why they were so embarrassed. They were so embarrassed because they looked at Yosef and they realized who they sinned so badly against. Who was this person that they threw in a pit? Somebody who had unbelievable potential, somebody who was only good, somebody who was, and who's now so generous to them. They were like, that's why they were embarrassed. And the analogy is Yosef is compared to the Jewish soul. And the Jewish soul is thrown. Yosef was thrown in Egypt. He was thrown in the dungeon. He was thrown in the pits. He was, everything went wrong for him. And the neshama comes from heaven. It comes from such a delightful, unbelievable place. It comes down to, it's like the pits of the pits. It comes down to the pits of the pits. And it gets invested in our body. And everything that we do affects the neshama. And so like every time, and the neshama is like a hostage inside us, really, And every time, if you do something like ungracious to another Jew, it's like a punch in the neshama, And it's like, and the neshama is a sweet, pure thing, unbelievable. So once in a while in life, I think it happens to people that once in a while we get a glimpse of the beauty of our soul, and when we get a glimpse of it, we feel so bad for everything that we've done to it, and so just like they threw Yosef in a pit, sometimes we throw our beautiful neshama in a pit. So we have to think about it and think about, what can I do for this dear, sweet neshama that's entrusted inside me? So anyway, that's what I wanted to say because I thought it was a very sweet little, I never thought about it in that depth. I just thought about it, they're embarrassed because they threw him in a pit. It's really us that we throw our neshama in a pit sometimes, and we have to do whatever we can to rescue it from the pit. So I want to talk about, I don't know, it's just like such an unsettling time since this deal was made in Israel. And it's every single Jew, I think, feels the same way, that there's, like, if these were your daughters, if this was your children, you wouldn't care what was done to get them out. You absolutely wouldn't care. It's like there's nothing, we are suffering with those hostages. It says such an interesting thing about the Jewish people. I'm going to just give a little sidebar. That when Mendel Bayless was on trial for blood libel in England in the 1900s, something that hadn't been done for centuries, they actually raised a blood libel. The old blood libel that Jews, the ridiculous lies that Jews use blood to make their blood of Christian children to make their matzahs. Yeah, so it had been disproven conclusively for hundreds of years earlier, and then it arose again in the 1900s in England. Who could believe it? And the and they were citing all sorts of things that they thought were anti-Semitic in Jewish literature. And one of the prosecutors, whatever, said, "Do you realize it says in Jewish literature that?" By the way, when Mendel Bayless was on trial, Jews around the world were helping. They were sending, doing whatever they could to help this poor guy who was accused of such a ridiculous thing. And everybody was up in arms. Jews around the world were up in arms and doing things to try and help the situation. And so when the prosecutor raised this argument, you see, they don't think they think that non-Jews are not even human. They say that Adam is, and the word Adam, person, the word Adam is only refers to Jews. You see what kind of people these people are? And the defense attorney explained the answer. The defense attorney said, there's only one noun in all of Hebrew that cannot be done in the plural, and it's Adam. Adam is the only noun for which there is no plural. And that's it. Why is that? The Jewish people are referred to as Adam, and the Jewish people are one body. There's no plurality there. And he said, and the evidence for it is this trial itself. You're trying to accuse this poor guy. He's not famous. He's not nothing. And every Jew in the world is up in arms, and they're outraged about what's happening, and they feel for him, and they're trying to help him. That's why Jews are called Adam, because we are one person. Such a powerful argument. And it's exactly what's happening now. Like my heart is split in two. And on one side, if these were my daughters, if these were my children anyway, they don't even have to be my children. I want them out, and I don't care what the price is. But on the other hand, I do care about this price. I don't know how Trump called it an epic deal. It's crazy to call it an epic deal. A few years ago, when there was one Jew that was a hostage, one Jew that was taken prisoner by Hamas or whatever it was back then. His name was Gilad Shalit. And the Jews cannot stand for another Jew to be helpless in the hands of monsters. We can't stand it. Who could stand it? We can't stand it. And they bargained, and they gave 1,000 Hamas, Arab terrorists. They gave up 1,000 Arab terrorists who were in prison in return for the release of Gilad Shalit. Many, many, many of those terrorists were the ones who designed October 7th, the ones who were released from this trade deal of Gilad Shalit, were including the mastermind himself, Sinwar. He was one of the ones that was released from this crazy deal with Gilad Shalit. Now, you can't know what the right thing to do is. Only somebody like the Rebbe can know what the right thing to do is. And the Rebbe explained that we are not allowed to bargain with. You can't bargain. You're not allowed to bargain with terrorists. You're not allowed. In the Middle Ages, they took many rabbis hostage. Yeah. And they wanted enormous ransoms, and you were not allowed. Like one of them said, "Do not violate Jewish law. You're not allowed to get me out, because they'll just, if they see that they get a lot of money, they'll just do it to the next guy and the next guy and the next guy. We can't show that it's profitable." And so the Rebbe gave an example of it was a very nice Jewish man, and he was grabbed by bad guys. And by terrorists, and they traded back then. They traded 75 terrorists. And he said, of course, everybody said, how can we not do this? He's a family man. He has kids. How can we not do this? But it teaches them that this is a profitable venture. This is how we get more. This is how we get all our bad guys released. So anyway, right now they made this deal. The initial stuff is 33 hostages for 33 terrorists for every Jew, and a 90-day ceasefire. And among those people that were released, they're monsters, absolute monsters that they released. People who in court, when they were, tried, they laughed at their victims. They just laughed right in court. And where is it? Yeah. And 90 terrorists were released today, 90 terrorists, 12 of them right into Yerushalayim. They didn't release them into some far off place. They released them right in Yerushalayim and right in Yehuda and Shomron. And these guys are proud of what they did. So, and the whole deal is to release close to 2,000 terrorists. Now, the problem is that Israel does not have anything called a death penalty. They do not do a death penalty in Israel. It's not allowed. And so when they capture terrorists, they don't kill them. They give them some of these guys who they are releasing. Some of them, they're planning to release close to 2,000 of them. Some vast numbers of them not only have a life sentence, but they have multiple life sentences against them for the horrendous things that they did. And one of them has 48 life sentences, and he's going to be released. And so anyway, so what can we do? I mean, like, if Trump says this is an epic deal, and Netanyahu agreed to it, there's no salvation from either one of these guys. There's no salvation from either one of these guys. What a person has to do is we have to turn straight to Hashem and say, Hashem, you have wrenched our hearts enough. You have wrenched our hearts enough. We are split in two. You see how every Jew suffers over every hostage. You see who we are. You have to give us the Geula Shlema. You have to end this. You're the one. There's nobody to rely on. There's absolutely no politician to rely on. Not on this side, not on that side, not Jewish, not non-Jewish, not Elif Abdullah is Jewish. There's only Hashem. And so that's my theory. My theory is just to go straight to Hashem and say, enough. And we need enough. Anyway, I'm going to I want to, yeah. Oh, you know what the Rebbe said also? I should play it for you. I have it right here. Let's play it. Just 1 minute. I have to share my screen. It's very short. Is that screen share? I guess so. It doesn't say screen share anymore.
We can't see it.
Just a minute. I didn't do it yet. Okay. Now I'm going to pull this up. And okay. Now, okay.
Jeden was so gefunden Bashev und hat ihm die Gewalt herausgelassen. Bashev in Sache Knecht. Es war nicht, mit dem nächsten Gebiet nach Fettlich und 70 von Sache Knecht. Und Goli hat ihm gesagt, wie bald das in die Gewenke in andere Brüder und wie bald das Jeden mit einem Spruch. Wenn hat sich nicht gekonnt rechnen, wie viel mit der Fall herausgelassen. Und das war Surim, was das so gesagt. Beschaß, mir sagt, dass in Teile. Und Achmon el-Islam, jeder Riede verweht sich, und der Herr als People, als in der Gewenke, in anderer Weg, aber frei ist, Teile, und der Frei, der 70, dachte bei sich, öfter das der Weg, wo sie öfter in der Gewenke, in anderer Weg, und nervig, ach, es nicht so, ich gehe allemal, aber es kann mir kaum, es rät sich, wenn nicht, wenn er 70. Wurden angesagt, die Räder und die Schreier in der Verkehr schon nach Huslore, soll es machen, als Schweig, wer der von 70 sein, aber wir soll machen, Simches für Ibulis, Und wir wissen, dass da andere, was nicht das kibische Tier, wenn sie das Sof mit Galle sein, bis wann es dann noch mit Galle gewesen. Zwischen unter die etliche und 70 gewesen, die Mata Hau, und die, was seine dort nicht gewesen, bei Besa Suri, wegen Unionen schon Mabika, was viele wegen Unionen schon Mabika hat nicht angehalten, die Schiete, Jorno Hanan, auf nichts noch geben sich die Jungen von der Terroristen. Die dort gewesen, die Kohle zu halb etlich und 30, und die, was von Befehl, sich vernommen, mit Unionen schon Meister Chabolo, bis Meister Chabolo, was hat gekostet, nicht Porsches Mama. Das ist der richtige Tag mit der Time wie Chulu, aber was hat die davon gemacht, das so? Man konnte nicht Atrible sein. Aber wie der meistens Befehl, nur dem hat kein Brede nicht mit der Time in Schurten, Time in Kmusse wie Chulu, muss nach Riesel, nach Mondelslan, nach Ratstam, versorgt Befehl ist, auch halt die Wege leid, heuer mit ihm. Das am meisten, was wir können, haben Krieg. Der Erdl von 70 gefühlt sich bekommen und gefühlt sich in dem Mord, was nach Mondelslan, heuer Lissie, besetzlich gestieben, verbo sollen sich mit dem Staat und sein noch einmal heuer Lissie. Komur und die Physik ist wahr, dass der Charles nach Mondelslan ist frei. Und weiß, dass die gespiegen in Pfanne. Setzt mir in einer zweiten, dass Gischli broche. Und heißt soll machen, broche, der Teva Mädchen, nicht broche Befehl, machen Bankett, machen Maseltov, soll tanzen in die Gassen. Und nur wegen Pfannen mit allen Sachen, was sind damit verbunden.
Okay. So, anyway, I want to hear your ideas. I'm going to, so that people feel comfortable with sharing, I'm going to turn off the recording. Where is it? Oh, here. Okay, good. And have a good night, everybody.